This morning, we continue our study in spiritual success or distress. We are in the second study on this, lesson number 5. We are in John the 13th chapter, and we're going to talk a little bit about the disciples' relation to one another in this. If you note on your handout, it says, in an interview, you were asked to list the great forces of evil that oppose God. What would you place on that list? And then we're giving a great number of suggestions, I guess we might say, of those evil forces that oppose God. And I would suggest that we could add to that list innumerably. There's a lot more things that's going on in our world that is evil. And it is those things that oppose God. And as we note, there are countries, governments that oppose the truth, that oppose God. And I would suggest even where we live, there is more opposition to God than there is those who are positive for God, much less for Christianity. In this, he notes that he asked the question, would you include human arrogance? And, I contemplated this just a little bit as I thought about arrogance. Arrogance, to my definition, would denote one that puts themselves before God, one who believes that they are the most important thing in this world. Now, I understand that sometimes people have low self-esteem, and I don't think that's what he's talking about here. I think it's getting to the point that God doesn't matter in my life, that I'm going to do what I desire to do, what I want to do, and it doesn't matter what God would desire for me to do. He notes here in our handout, no master wants an arrogant servant. A servant exists to serve. Arrogance arises from the extravagated sense of self-importance, and arrogance grows, service declines. Arrogance creates the justification for refusing to serve. Arrogance takes one's eyes off the master, and arrogance places one's eyes on self. And we do live in a selfish world. I mean, that is a reality. And there are those, I would say, would be those who are so full of themselves, can we use that word as arrogance, full of themselves, that they don't want to do anything for anybody else. A lot of the emergency groups, whether it be fire department or EMS or many other things, have relied for years on volunteers. And you cannot get people to volunteer for things like that hardly anymore. I know that was the struggle that we had with EMS there years ago, was that we could not recruit people. And if we did recruit them, send them to school, pay for the schooling, all of that, they would make about 2 or 3 runs and they would decide this wasn't what they thought, this wasn't what they signed up for, because it's a pretty good deal. And even in the fire department, a lot of people will volunteer to be on the fire department. They don't want to be involved in the fire department. They don't want to do it. They don't want to do the training and all of the things that it takes to serve a community. So we're struggling in those areas where people don't want to volunteer to do anything. And they, for whatever reason, don't do that. And I don't know the reason. As Christians, arrogance is not what we are, what we're involved in, putting ourselves before God, but we are those who follow the example that Jesus has given us as we've studied in all these lessons. And we are humble. We serve. We do for others. In our outline, it says arrogance is the enemy of humility. Humility submits, arrogance defiles. Humility looks at others, arrogance looks at self. Humility quietly recognizes my significance is defined in my service to others. Arrogance exaggerates my self-importance. Humility never regards service as inappropriate. Arrogance regards service as appropriate only if it benefits me. And, we run into things like that regularly, It's not what I can do for somebody else, but what am I going to get out of it? What am I going to get out of this if I do this? Well, for years and years and years, we spent, and of course, this is my illustration today, is we spent serving our community on that ambulance. And we went to take care of people and help them and do whatever we could. We went to car wrecks and illness and all kinds of things, accidents of all sorts. But you know what we got paid to do that? Nothing. Middle of the night. Oh, no, it's that deal. It's about 5 o'clock, between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning. That's when you get the call. And it's somebody that's been sick all night. They were sick the day before and didn't feel good, and they just couldn't make it any longer. But what do? We hit the floor running, went out there and took care of them. But sadly, people today say, well, if I do this, what am I going to get out of it? Well, all those years, 20 for us, for me, 25 years doing the ambulance stuff, and you get nothing for it except the blessing of serving others. And that's a whole lot to me. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I like the blessing part. It notes here what causes a humble disciple to become an arrogant disciple. It says the transition from humility to arrogance can occur for many reasons: weariness, frustration, acquired power, acquired money, a rising self-importance or sense of self-importance, and the injustice are a few of those reasons, and I'm sure we could add to that. Over here in Matthew 8, it talks about the apostles as they were being asked by Jesus to come and follow him. Over in Matthew 4, 18 through 22. Also in chapter 9, Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Matthew, they left their occupations to follow Jesus. Now, these men were working. The society was poor. They had families. These men had families. But yet when Jesus come by and asked them, encouraged them, commanded them, whatever you want to call it, to come follow him, they went. Because they seen something important that needed to be done. Now, we will discuss just in a moment just a little bit about what their thinking was, and we've talked about this before. Was it to serve the Messiah, to serve God? Or was it thinking the idea that Jesus, being the Messiah, was going to be the ruler of Israel and get rid of the Romans? That was a key factor in their thinking. Jesus gave them nothing physical. He did not have any money. He had no prestige. Even Israel rejected him. He was not going to be the ruler, even though there was that idea in the minds of many. They did not follow to climb Israel's social ladder. Jesus worked with the poor, the outcast, yet they stayed with him the good times and the bad, and experienced the joy of appreciation and the sting of ingratitude. It notes here, but in less than 2 weeks, they went from humble men who feared that their master would be killed to arrogant men who thought only of themselves. And this transition was very unique. Some of them left, some of them got away from the situation, some followed along and witnessed what happened to Jesus. But it wasn't exactly what they had contemplated. And that goes into the next one that says they followed Jesus in the conviction that he was the Messiah. Again, hoping that he would be the ruler of the physical kingdom and they would have a place in that kingdom. But the kingdom that Jesus was bringing was not a physical kingdom, but a spiritual kingdom. And they had great places in that kingdom. But it was not that which they would reap worldly goods from, if you will. In John chapter 13, 1 through 11, it talks about the feast of the Passover here. And Jesus privately ate the meal with the 12. And after they had prepared to eat, or had started eating, Jesus got up, took off his robe, put on a towel around his waist, and washed the feet of the disciples. Now, that was a painful moment for them. This was a humble example that he was giving them. And remember, they denoted that Jesus was the Messiah and that he was the head over all that they had been doing. He was the one in whom they were following. But yet, here is the one who should be served, serving. And that gets back to us, just like it does the apostles. Rather than being those who deem that we need to be served, we need to be those who are serving and helping others. In John chapter 13, verses 12 through 20, he asked the question there in number 1. After washing their feet, what question did Jesus ask them? Why do you think that he asked that question? Let's read verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. That's not the right passage. No, I got to get back over here in 13. That says 15. And about verse 12. Oh, that looks a whole lot better right there. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garment and reclined at the table again, he said to them, do you know what I've done to you? Now, they were a little bit perplexed, confused, why Jesus would do something like this. Well, it was a common thing, the foot washing. Whenever a guest came, they didn't wear shoes or boots like we do today. They wore sandals, or they went barefoot. Their feet were dirty. So they would wash their feet. Whomever would usually have a servant that would wash the feet. But here, Jesus was doing this where the lowliest of servants would have been given such a task. So he says, do you know what I've done for you? Well, this would have been somewhat maybe shocking, embarrassing to the apostles, but they needed to learn a lesson, and that was the key. It's noted within this that maybe they had gotten a little full of themselves because they were apostles. They were in a position of authority because they were the ones doing a lot of this teaching and so on and so forth. Number 2, What did he say when they were correct in doing? Why were they correct in doing this? Verse 13 it says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, so I am." In other words, he had that preeminence over them. He was the teacher, he was the Lord, and he should have been in that, I guess we could call it a higher place, that to be served rather than being the one to do the serving. In number 3, it said, if he washed their feet, what should they do? Verse 14. It says, if I then, the Lord and teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. And that brings us again to the idea of humbling ourselves, taking care of one another. None of us is greater than the other. We're all blessed as God's children. And that even goes out into the world. When we serve those in the world, it doesn't matter who they are. We need to serve them. And I understand that some people abuse the blessings that some Christians do for them. They abuse that. But still, we need to serve those that are in need, those who are struggling. And sometimes service is telling people no. Sometimes service is telling people we can't help you right now. You need to make some adjustments, or helping people. And when we get into the idea that people are in sin, when people have fallen into sin so deep, what's the greatest service that we can do for them? Huh? Teach them about Jesus. Yeah, teach them the gospel. Help people out of that situation. If we find a brother or a sister who has fallen away, we need to go to them and try to help them come back. It's not just physical, but spiritual. Jesus giving the example here. Number 4, what did he give as the example? Verse 15, for I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. So they need to wash one another's feet. They need to take care of one another. And this was his example, that it doesn't matter your position, you need to do that. Could you just imagine somebody, and this just popped into my brain, somebody that's high up in a government office, and you come in there and you're going to visit with that individual, and they come over and wash your feet? Of course, now we know in this passage, can't think right off the top of my mind, but one of the disciples says, well, if you're going to wash my feet, just wash everything. They make it much better. But the thing is that I would suggest that they wouldn't even probably get up and hold the chair for you. Or if you needed a drink of water, they're not going to go get it for you. But as Christians, we should. We should be serving others. In number 5, it says, what point did Jesus make about the slave and the person sent on a mission? Why did Jesus make this point in these circumstances at this time? Verse 16. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. We are not greater than the master. We're not greater than the one who sent one on a mission. If we could treat one another with that humble servanthood, rather than considering ourselves above everybody else. Now, we've talked probably a little about this. About last week, we talked about those things that we don't like to do, those dirty jobs. And everybody has that dirty job that they don't like to do. and But if we are to do something, and the master tells us we need to do this, we need to take care of that situation. If we need to go and do a mission, do a trip, do something for God, we need to do it. Might not be our favorite thing, but and sometimes it's scary. I remember some of the first time, nah, probably not the first time. Yeah, first time I did the door knocking. I guess we could use that example. That was a scary thing. Go knock on people's doors. I didn't like knocking on people's doors. I don't like people knocking on my door. And I've had some of them come show up, and they would knock on my door, and then they left knowing that they didn't like knocking on doors because I was so kind and loving, and especially if they were bringing some false doctrine, Christianity type idea to me. But it was a scary thing. And I've made the illustration, and you guys have heard this, but I remember we were door knocking in a community that we lived in, and there was a location in that community that was very roughest place in the community. And I walked on by that day, guys. I walked right on by that place. I was not going up to that place and knocking on them doors. I knew who lived in them places, and it was bad. And this was probably in the 80s. It was bad in the 80s up there in that place. Y'all know that place, don't you? Yeah, it's right across the street from you. It's not as bad today, is it? Oh, it's not as bad as it was. Well, it was back then. Here was this story. I got about a half a block north on that street across from y'all, the next street over. I turned around, went back, and knocked every one of them doors. Because those people deserve the gospel, and I'm a servant of God. And I did it. But I walked by, guys. First time, it was kind of a scary thing. And I was by myself. Now, from where they live, it's a half a block over. This complex is a half a block over from where they live. And so it's a better deal. Lot cleaner than was back in the 80s anyway. But sometimes we need to go someplace and do something for God, and we do that. And even if it's scary, even if it's something that we really don't want to do. And I know whenever I was in school, we did a lot of campaigns and went to a lot of places that was very questionable in the cities, in big cities. And I never had any big problems until we were out in the country. And me and a guy went up to a country farmhouse, and we knocked on the door, and my partner left me, and I was standing there, what's the deal? And I turned around. That dog that was in the backyard was a big dog because he was out of the backyard. And my partner already left me. And here I was with the dog. Oh, well, that's all right. I wasn't afraid of the dog, and the dog wasn't afraid of me, so we got out of there okay. So the master tells us we need to do something. If God says, we need to do this, we need to do it. And sometimes that's talking to people about Jesus. And a lot of times it's very uncomfortable. But we need to do that. Verse number 6. The knowledge of what had happened would not bless them. What would bless them? Verse 17. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. And that was the thing about going back and knocking all the doors of that little apartment complex. It was a blessing to some of them and a blessing to me. I don't know if any of those people ever became Christians, but the seed was sown. And that is a key factor. Number 7. Did Jesus know that he would be betrayed by one of the 12? Look at verse 18. It says, I do not speak of all of you, I know the one I have chosen, but it is the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. Well, the answer is yes. He knew that Judas was going to turn against him. Number 8. From this moment forward, Jesus would tell them what would happen before it happened. And that's the question, why? Verse 19. From now on, I am telling you before it comes to pass, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. And that's the key. He's telling them what's about to transpire, and he's going to face arrest, the trials, the public humiliation, the rejection, and execution on the cross. And nothing the disciples expected would happen. Everything the disciples thought that could not happen would occur. And if they were to believe that God was using every evil happening to work for his purpose, they must realize that Jesus was fully aware of what would happen before it occurred. So in essence, they were told this is what's going to happen, and we have to understand that. Number 9, it says, what importance did Jesus attach to receiving someone that he had sent? Verse 20. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. Those who receive someone Jesus sent, they're receiving Jesus. The person who receives Jesus would receive the person Jesus sent. So in essence, if we are sent, and we go to Matthew 28, go into all the world, that denotes everybody, whether it be a spiritual need or a physical need. So there are many questions that we could ask and discuss about the incident on the last night of Jesus' physical life. No question is more important than this question. What should we learn from what happened when Jesus washed the disciples' feet? I would suggest that we are just people. This was Jesus in his humanity. And we need to serve others. We need to help others, do for others. I've noted so many times that, if there's a need that you see, sometimes fulfilling that need is not only a blessing for them, but it's a blessing for you. But they don't have to even know who fulfilled that need. They don't even need to know. And I've noted that we've known of people who were hungry. They needed groceries. And I'll be honest with you, I'd much rather take a sack of groceries and set it on somebody's porch than go up there and knock on the door and give it to them. I just assumed it'd be there and then not even know where it came from. Now that's just me. I also know that it's a good thing for what our emergency group, I been keeping up with our group that goes out to these disaster relief. I'll get it in a minute. I've been keeping up with them, and that's great. That's a great thing. I don't know what all they put in those boxes. Some of them would always put in some flyers, back when flyers was popular. And I remember one group that always put a Bible in there, in every box. They had a Bible, little paperback Bible that they put in there with them, and they knew where it come from, and that way that they could come visit area congregations wherever they might be. So let's stop there this morning, and we will continue in our study next Lord's Day morning in spiritual success or distress.